3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Welcome to the System and Soul Podcast, a place for founders and entrepreneurs to discover breakthrough in their business. I'm Benj Miller, fellow founder, business coach, and your host. This is your place to gain clarity and control as you lead through the challenges you face every day in your business. Running a business is just hard, so we're bringing you the conversations with people who are figuring it out, have figured it out, to help you find breakthrough. Welcome to the System and Soul Podcast. System and Soul, I hope you're having a great day. It's about to get better. I've got a really fun conversation that I'm about to bring you, and I already recorded it, so I can already tell you that this is going to challenge some of the ways that you think in a beautifully freeing way. I met this guy through a peer group that I'm in, a big one, like national, global kind of deal, and he is a global thinker. His latest book was what caught my attention. It's called Built to Beat Chaos. We'll talk about that, and we'll also link to it in the show notes. But you are going to enjoy Gary. He is a sage. He is a deep thinker, and he has quite the resume in terms of business building and leading people. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Friends, listeners, welcome back to System and Soul. I am so excited to introduce you to hopefully a new name. If not, you're going to be happy to hear his name. But Gary Harpst is here. Gary is a life, well, I would put him in the sage category at this point, but he was an entrepreneur, a business leader, and has written several books. I got to know him through his latest book, which is called Built to Beat Chaos. And right away, I knew this was my guy. I knew we thought in a similar way with a similar worldview. And it was just super cool to read that book and digest it. It was very timely. I think I learned some things and applied some things right away. So he's already had an impact on me. And I hope through our conversation, he can have an impact on you as well. So Gary, I am honored, grateful. Welcome to System and Soul Podcast.
Hey, thanks, Benj. I've been looking over some of your podcasts, and I love the way you guys engage us in thinking. That's good. I think sometimes we're so busy acting that we don't take time to stop and think.
Oh, that's so true. That's so true. Well, I'm curious and excited to get into what you're thinking about, but as promised, I always have to ask the question so we can get to know you a little bit of that slice of personality. What is something that we should know about you that we can't Google or find out?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. And in today's world, we're so transient. You know, everybody's moves all the time. And my grandchildren are now the 8th generation in Hancock County, Ohio. And so we've experienced the opposite of what most of the world has. And so I'm 6th generation. So that's something you wouldn't find out about me. My ancestor was a Hessian soldier hired by the British to fight Americans in the Revolutionary War. And he escaped prison camp and then stayed in America and had 12 children. And one of his children ended up in Hancock County, Ohio. And so that's why I'm here. So you wouldn't find that history anywhere. I bring it up just because I think about intergenerational family relationships and the trade-offs between being in the same location geographically versus different locations. And
yeah,
so I've got children that live a ways away, and I've got children that are a mile away. So I see both worlds.
Do your children there have children there?
Yes, my oldest son has 4 boys, but 2 years apart. So when it was 6, 4, 2, and 1 month. So they're really stair step. They're now older, 11 and 11, 9. But boy, are they into baseball? I'm going to a lot of games every week.
Oh, different sport, but I can relate to that a lot. My kids are about that age, and they're all over the place. So, Gary, What's on your mind these days? We're going to talk about the top 3 things that you're thinking about, pondering, question, figuring out. So kick us off. What are you thinking about these days?
Well, when I was freshman in college, here's a tribute to your teachers. They think they didn't have an impact. Well, decades ago, I went to my first sociology class, and one of the first questions ever posed to me as a college student was, why is it that humanity has progressed so incredibly technologically and not at all sociologically? And little did I know that that would be a lifelong question for me as a student of behavior. So that's one of my top areas that I think about. And in particular, I happen to be a Christian, so I think I look for answers for deep questions from a biblical worldview. So that actually is part of why I wrote that recent book that you said you took a look at, to integrate some of these deep questions about why society is the way it is and what the role of faith is. So that's one of my topics.
What would it look like if we were to evolve? Do you have a picture of that?
Well, I was listening to Marty's, one of your previous podcasts, where he talked about growth being something we've got to change our thinking on, because for 10,000 years, that's kind of the way he phrased it, we've been in growth mode, and at some point we have to stop growing. And what occurred to me is the biblical view of our challenge is not that we're consuming more resources than we should, or that we're growing too fast and as a result are consuming too much resource. The biblical view is that what it means to be human is that our desires shape our actions compared to a dog or a cat. They have pre-programmed desires, but they don't dream about a 2-story doghouse and then go pursue that dream. And what the biblical answer to our challenges is that we're created in God's image, and we have the ability to imagine and desire things, and then our actions pursue them. And so in today's world, 76% of the consumption of goods today is by 20% of the people. Mm. And 1%, the low 1% consumes, or the low 20% consumes 1%. So that means the top 20% are consuming 50 times as much in their daily life as the 1%. And so I would suggest that growth isn't our problem, desire is our problem. Because
talk about that.
What we consume is a function of what we want. And so for a student of Scripture, if you really look broadly, the overall message is there is something genetically wrong with our heart, that we as people are born selfish and born to want and pursue our wants. And that sickness is the reason why society has never advanced in the history of the world, that we still behave and act like people did 10,000 years ago as far as being able to get along with each other. And so the biblical answer to our challenge is there's something wrong with all of our desires. And actually, that's the gospel message, is there is a way to fix that, but it can't be fixed from inside. It has to be fixed with an external action. So you can tell I have a very biblical worldview, but I translate it into business. I'm a business guy. For 40 years, I've been a CEO and created several businesses. And so I'm pretty hardcore about running businesses and building profits and being stewards and taking care of customers. But this worldview helps me understand why people act and behave the way they do. Mm-hmm. And so often our chaos in life is that we chase people's behaviors instead of trying to understand the desires that are behind those behaviors. And you'll be a much more effective leader, whether it's in your family, your teenage kids, your whatever, if you quit reacting to actions and surface level things and start saying, well, what was behind that action? And invest in changing the motivation part. It's harder, but the biblical answer is that's the only way we improve.
Yeah, it took some. I mentioned this to you previously, but I loved the progression that you laid out with desire and how you can. It's part of our turmoil as humans is when, at one end of the spectrum, our actions are out of alignment with our desire. My coach talks about that our strongest desires are not as important as our deepest desires. And what he means by that is it's his way of saying, like, God gave us these desires, but we've manipulated them. We've bastardized them. We've been influenced by other sources about what it looks like to pursue those desires. And so the strongest desire is, like to go have some ice cream, but the deepest desire is to be fit. Right. So like their intention. And the more we can understand that, I think the thing for me is stopping with the intentionality to process and think, where is this desire actually coming from? What is the deepest desire here? Because it's rarely not the consumer growth driven desire, right?
Yeah, I think that's well said. And, I think where this spills over into life and business is, hey, whether you believe you have a biblical worldview or not I relate really well to people who have a different worldview than I do, as long as they are trying to act and live out according to their worldview. Then I can interface with them really well and learn from them, and hopefully they can learn from me. But what I would say is this worldview is a foundational element in what it means to be a leader, because once you assume that everybody is created in the image of God with the ability to imagine and overcome chaos and be a winner, so to speak, and that at the root of that is they have desires, then what leadership really means, trying to understand what it is that people at the deepest level want and how you can align those deepest wants with the mission of the organization. And I liken it like this: scientists work with atoms, and they're able to build and assemble amazing things. Space shuttle had 2.4 million parts. But the reason you're able to build things in the physical realm, and the reason we've advanced so far, is the physical realm has a set of rules that work. The electromagnetic energy works the same way. So I can put atoms together and scale them with predictable results. Well, a leader is putting together unpredictable things. A leader is not putting together atoms, they're putting together people. And every single person you meet has desires at the root of our behaviors. And my desires yesterday were different than today. So a leader is sitting here coping with chemistry that isn't predictable. And so this worldview really defines a different view of what your job is as a leader. It has to do with how you align people's desires with the purpose of the organization and understand their desires. So it's a very deep idea, and it really helps me a lot in terms of how I interact with people.
Well, that leads me to my question. So what does that mean as a leader? How do we react to all the uncertainty of all the people and over time? And, the only thing that comes to my mind is you have to have more frequent, deeper conversations.
I agree with that. The one-on-one interaction is critical. I would say the most foundational responsibility of a leader is, first of all, to get purpose clear. And that sounds non-relational, but purpose is a topic we all love talking about, but it's a complex topic in the sense that if I ask you what your purpose is, well, today your purpose might be going through the 3 interviews you're doing or something with me. What was the purpose for the month or the week or the year? And what's your purpose with your family versus your job? And so there's a purpose architecture that anybody has to sort through. And a leader in a business, first of all, has to know what the role of the business is. What is the purpose of the business? If you can't understand that, then you have no way to interact with an individual about their purpose relative to the business's purpose. And so that creates chaos. And so clarity of purpose for individuals and the organization is the foundation of bringing some order and satisfaction to the process. So it is really hard work, and it takes a lot of skill. Now, the Bible has something to say about the chemistry that makes us work together, which is a different topic.
Well, don't stop there.
Well, if we have, the way an atom is structured, it's kind of such simple truth that, there's a proton and the neutron in the middle of an atom, and then electrons fly around it. And what is it that holds that electron in relationship in orbit? And there's electromagnetic energy that is measurable and predictable. And so if we're putting people together into in a unit, a team, a business, those sorts of things, then the question becomes, as a leader, what is it that binds humans together like atoms in a piece of steel? What is that? And Jesus himself said that all of Scripture, all of the truth in Scripture can be summed up really in three ideas: love God, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so, we think of love as this ooey gooey word, but he was defining something very specific about the chemistry of human society. He was saying what holds us together is the way we relate to others. And the word love he used is what is called agape, which is not our typical way we like to think about love. I remember I went to a marriage conference with my wife before we got married, and the guy said there, marriage is not 50-50, it's 100-100. And what he meant by that was how I treat my wife is related to my obligation to God, not to her. Yeah. In other words, I'm obligated to treat her right regardless of how she treats me. That's where the 100-100. Human society likes 50-50 relationships. You do this for me, and I'll do this for you. And then if you make a mistake, then I'm going to retaliate. And you get into this constant failure mode. Well, the biblical idea, Jesus said, is if you want order in your life, you love the people around you with this proactive love, that I am going to respond to you, not based on how you respond to me, but how I should respond to you. And so now we have this chemistry being defined. A leader's role is to get purpose right, and then understand the purpose of the people in their team, how they're equipped, how they're built, what they're good at, understand their personal objectives so that you can help align those, and then you love them and you care for them. And that's the model God has for building a successful society and organization. But of course, we're weak and don't do it very well.
Yeah, it's a simple idea, and it's almost impossible to pull off, right?
Yeah. Well,
That's
actually, the New Testament part of the Bible would say it is impossible, and that's the gospel part where God actually intervenes in our lives and changes our desires. So
love that. Man, that got rich and deep. What's the that felt like probably 3 or 8 things wrapped into one, but what's the next thing that's on your mind that you're thinking about these days?
Well, I would just elaborate on chaos. It's a term I hear almost every day, whether at home, at church, you name it. People are talking about chaos all the time. I think with the internet, we have constant news feeds, chats. We're actually bombarded with message. So the chaos feels like it's greater than normal. And so it's really fascinating. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, the very first thing, you ask somebody what it is God created first. And that, if they've read the Bible, they'll think, I think he created light somewhere in there. And you kind of go back. And if you really read it carefully, the first thing he created was chaos. It says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and they were without form and void. And then after he tells us that key information, then he starts saying, okay, I want to bring light into the picture. I want to do this. And so there's a series of transforming steps to bring order out of this chaos. Well, what this tells us later on in Genesis, it says we're created in his image, and we are supposed to do the same thing. We're supposed to bring order out of chaos, and he's modeled it for us. So this is a big mindset change. So when you are feeling overwhelmed by chaos, there's something wrong in your thinking, because chaos is not our enemy. Chaos is simply raw material from which we apply purpose. And I liken the example when I built my house, there were truckloads of lumber brought here, and they laid in piles. And they look like chaos until you bring out the blueprint. And then the blueprint says, oh, get that 2x4 and put it here. So it's chaos until there's a blueprint. Well, that's the way your life is. You will always feel like you're in chaos if you don't have clarity of purpose. And I was talking to an individual I know today. He said he got a call from his wife, and she was in tears, and her teenage son had been not treating her well, and he was on a trip, and he's thinking, how do I respond to this? Do I let him have it when I get home? And and he and I have been going through this idea of chaos and how you respond with purpose. And he said, well, my purpose is to find out why my son is acting that way, and to talk to him about those things, not talk to him about the surface level actions he's got, but what is the motivation behind that? And so that's the other thing I would just say to people. And again, that's why I wrote the book, is people are being disempowered and looking at chaos like it's got power over them. And the biblical answer is it does not have power over you. You just have to figure out how to use it and start applying purpose to it. So it's a very freeing up idea. But I find when I'm listening to people and at parties or whatever, I start to feel the chaos. I start to react to all the things they're talking about that are broken. And then when I take a deep breath and come back home and say, well, my purpose is this, then the chaos flies away, and I just focus on the pieces that I'm working on.
Yeah, it's almost like there's so much chaos out there, but you kind of did this separation motion with your hand. It's like we only need to look at the chaos that is the raw material for our purpose.
That's right.
And then we're refocused on purpose, and the rest of the chaos is for somebody else's purpose, right? They can figure it out. I agree. That's really cool.
And if you get overwhelmed by the chaos, you don't do anything, as opposed to focus on your purpose. And that's the best thing you can do for humanity, is have clear purpose and use your gifts and skills and build family, build schools, build things.
Is there a direct correlation in your mind between desire and purpose?
Oh yeah. I think they overlap. In fact, I make a point in the book to not get too much hung up on the terminology. And so I'll give you an example how people can get tied up in knots in communication. I want to get fit. So I sit there and think, well, how am I going to do that? And I could I could start running, jogging, and buy some shoes. I could do this or I could do that. And you come up with a plan. And then my plan happens to be to go to the mall and buy an exercise bike or something. And somebody runs into me in the mall and says, what you doing today? Well, that's a purpose question. Why are you here at the mall? Well, I answer them, I'm here to get a bike. I don't answer them, I'm trying to get fit. I answer, my purpose is this. Well, it turns out I've had a thought process that there's a purpose behind that purpose.
Yeah.
And so when we ask people, well, what's your purpose in life? It is almost an improperly worded question, because there's a whole hierarchy of purposes. And, there's the eternal, what happens to me after I die? And what is my purpose relative to eternity? That's a God question. And then I get married and say, what is my purpose with my family? What is my purpose at work? And so you as a leader, by the way, I define leadership not as a job title. It's an individual role. Everybody's a leader in the sense that they have to define their own purposes understand how they relate to the other purposes around them, and sort of have an architecture that navigates this stuff. And people don't think it through. They just dive into life and have chaos because they don't have clarity of purpose.
Yeah. It'd be interesting. I'm just picturing, I was smiling as you were saying that, picturing like, what if I related to everybody in my world as purpose creatures, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm on a mission to understand their purpose, and that becomes the thing that holds us together. I love that's a.
By the way, don't you think that is that's an act of love?
Absolutely.
To see somebody say, "Well, tell me about you. What is it what spins your wheels?"
Yeah.
and to quit reacting and just learn about that person and what's in their heart, and that's an act of love. People need caregiving. By the way, just a sidebar, you talk about industry trends or things that are going on. I've had multiple conversations where there's an emerging industry happening very rapidly where, 20, 30 years ago, HR organizations in Fortune 1000 companies created this kind of a service in HR that was to care for employees. They have some name for it, employee service care groups or something. And they've never had any good adoption. They're a place you call, I've got a drug problem, and you call this number and we'll help you or point you someplace. They just never have worked. And more recently, what they've found is that organizations outside the company, like chaplaincy organizations or caregiving, total care, they're sometimes called, if you hire somebody to come into your team that is not part of your org, people will talk to that person more than they will talk to somebody inside the org. Yeah. And the adoption rate is, instead of 3%, it's 30, 40, 50%. And it's turning into an industry. I talked to a startup that's getting funding, venture capital funding, to do just this. And I said, well, what is it that you do for these people? And he said, basically, it's hire a friend. Mm. And so I'm coming back to your point about asking and understanding people. The industry coming through COVID, et cetera, you see or teenage suicide rates are up 600%. You see drug use. I mean, it's just, we're off the chart, falling apart as a society. There's the glue, the chemistry is coming apart, and organizations are throwing money at, not for a good reason, but they're actually paying for a friend for their employees.
Yeah.
It's sad, and that we've gotten to that state. And at the same time, people are moving away from churches and the fellowship and the places that are interested in you as an individual. Yes. And so we create internet-based chat groups to help replace friendship.
Yeah, which goes back to probably a strong desire being overriding our deeper desire for actual intimacy and people knowing. I couldn't help think about as you were saying that, I've said a couple things to my barber that I'm like, have I told anyone else that? He's not we're not tight friends, or you get out of a taxi cab and you're like, I just told that guy way too much stuff. And they get that all the time. And it is, we're more free with a stranger, safe with a stranger than sometimes our peers. Man, that's awesome.
But we want people to listen to us.
We do.
Yeah.
Number 3, what's the last thing on your mind?
Well, this is kind of out of character with the others, but it's what I call one of my biggest leadership lessons in life is learning to embrace constraints. And, as we don't like constraints. We chafe at them, from infancy on. We're fighting when we can't roll over, we want to roll over. When we roll over, we want to crawl. When we crawl, we want to walk. We always want to go beyond whatever our constraints are. But I have learned in business that, there was one time when I almost bankrupted one of my companies because I thought a certain direction was right, and I was investing heavily in a bad idea. And I pray like crazy and say, God, help me, give me more money, blah, blah, blah. And I think the answer is more money. And in this particular case, our sales dropped so much, I had to stop that project. And I had to be forced to have tighter constraints. Well, when I had tighter constraints, I had fewer people to put on the next generation product we needed to create. And we can only put 6 people on this project. And I said, hey, this is all I got. I mean, I don't, and those people, because they only had 6, they figured out a whole different way to develop software. We happened to be in the software business at the time. And it was a breakthrough. It was a breakthrough for the industry. It was a breakthrough for us. And if I'd had more money, I'd have spent it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think in your life, whether it's a personal constraint or a business constraint, I mean, you could actually say that the marriage vows are an example. You know, that when you make a commitment to your spouse, that becomes a constraint that says, no matter what happens, the solution is not to break these vows.
Right.
And so that's an illustration of a principle God has. He says, you make certain decisions in your life, and once those are set, then your options should fit within that constraint. And so often we want to break the constraint. Well, the solution to a broken relationship is I'll just get a divorce and find somebody else. And hey, I understand. I've seen divorces that were justified. I'm not attacking anybody spiritually or morally because of that.
Yeah.
But in the business situation, we grew 600% as an organization. We grew from 8 million to 60 million in the 5 years after we accepted these constraints, because it was a better way of doing things.
Yeah.
And so message to people is, when you look in your life and you look at something you think is the problem is my mate. The problem is somebody else. The problem is not enough money. The problem is that, stop a minute and think, is that really the problem? Or is there another way to approach this?
Yeah.
Because sometimes constraints are God-given. They literally force us to think in a different way.
To me, constraints feel a lot like chaos feels. Like I have a similar internal reaction to those, where and so maybe, you know, just like chaos is a raw material, maybe the constraints, I should view those as raw material as well.
Yeah, I think, well, Jesus said the truth sets you free. And in a way, sometimes constraints are just an expression of a truth. You know, and if you don't accept truth, then you can go any direction you want, but it won't work. So yeah. I agree with you. Hey, I have the same reaction. I have to remind myself of this every single day.
Well, that was all right. So I'll ask you the one question that I was dying to ask is I read your book, because your book's very holistic, as it looks at kind of a business and the personality and system that is a business. And I just found myself curious. I'm like, all right, Gary has learned all this, some of it intuitively and some of it the hard way.
Mm-hmm. Most of it.
And so I was curious, like what parts of, I don't even know how to ask it, that you almost have a framework in this book. What parts of the framework or the business ecosystem were the most challenging for you?
Well, in the book, the third section of the book, I think, is the most challenging. The way the book's organized, it says, what do you need to know to be an effective leader? Then what do you need to do? And the do is very much nuts and bolts, how to run a business, how to be a good leader, that whether you're Christian or not, they're basic principles to be competent. The third section of the book, so it's know, do. The third section is be. And, you know, in the old master apprentice model that was used in the Middle Ages, the idea was that a 12-year-old would be brought into some business, shoemaker or whatever, and he just swept the floors. And he gradually assimilated a little more experience and a little more responsibility. And over a period of years, maybe 20 years, by the time they're 30 or more, they've gotten more and more responsibility. They become a craftsman. And by the time they become a master, their profession is just in their bones. It's who they are. It's their identity. They don't have to think. They just respond out of who they are. It's become part of them. And I think that's the hardest part for all of us. The being part of leadership means that we can't just with lip service say we want to care for people. We have got to have arrived at the point that that's part of who we are, that it's not a rehearsal, it's in a pretend, it's real. And that takes years and years of maturing. And there are some advantages of getting old. Because that being part takes time. Yeah. And we're always in a hurry as youngsters. So I would say for me, I'm an engineer. I like organizing things. I like turning in formulas and checklists. It's the being part of people and marrying that with the knowledge and skills to build something with the people caring. Like you mentioned earlier, understanding what people want, taking time to listen to them, find out what's going on in their family, what are they struggling with, and caring about it. Yeah. Then they will be more open with you. They will help you make better decisions. It feeds. There's a model there of trust building, and then the result is you get better business results too. Everybody wins, but it's not easy. I mean, it's like any skill. You have to work at it.
I heard somebody use a similar analogy of kind of that apprentice, journeyman, craftsman, master. Yeah. And they talked about the way you get from stage 1 to stage 2 is the same as the way you get to stage 2 and stage 3 is the same way you get from stage 3 to stage 4. Just nobody likes the answers. It's time and reps. Yeah. And unfortunately, in an instant society, neither one of those we can go buy off the shelf or download into our brain.
Well, you could argue that today's culture, especially with the internet, is even reprogramming us to be micro thoughts. Just text, tweets. Whether we like it or not, that just becomes the model we're used to. They're not deep thought.
Yep, lost art. Gary, thank you for your time and wisdom and insight. I'm going to plug it one more time. Built to Beat Chaos, link in the show notes. Gary, tell us where they can find out more about you and the work you're doing now.
You can go to my personal website, garyharpst.com. That's one. It just takes you also to the Lead First website. Lead First is really, the book is a concept and a mission. The Lead First is me coming along with a team of people to help other organizations who buy into the idea of leadership from a biblical perspective. And so that's why there's 2 brands, Lead First and garyharpst.com.
Wonderful. Everybody check out Gary. I know you enjoyed and got something out of this as much as I did. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time.